My name is Daniel Moore, and I narrate real psychological accounts shared by people who are still struggling to understand what happened inside their own homes. The story you're about to hear was shared with me by Laura Bennett, a 36-year-old woman living with her husband and 2 children in Portland, Oregon. What she experienced never involved anything supernatural. Yet it quietly dismantled her sense of safety and made her question her own sanity for months. Laura reached out to me because what she went through was dismissed for too long. She didn't want sympathy or dramatic reactions. She wanted clarity. She wanted someone to listen without immediately explaining it away. The events I'm about to describe happened to her, and they unfolded slowly inside the most ordinary part of life, her home at night. What follows is Laura's experience told through my voice, exactly as she lived it. Laura told me that before everything began, her nights were predictable. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet you stop noticing after years of routine. Her husband, Mark, fell asleep quickly, usually within minutes. The children slept down the hall with their doors slightly open, something Laura insisted on because it made her feel closer to them. The first night she noticed something was unremarkable in every other way. Mark was asleep beside her, and the house had settled into that deep stillness that comes after midnight. Laura was awake only because she couldn't get comfortable, her mind restless for no clear reason. That's when she heard it. At first, it barely registered. A faint, repetitive sound that didn't belong to anything obvious. Not loud enough to startle her, but persistent enough to hold her attention. It sounded like a soft tapping, 3 taps, a pause, then 3 again. The sound was gentle, almost careful, and that somehow made it worse. Laura told me she didn't feel fear right away. Her first reaction was logic. Houses make noise. Pipes shift. Wood expands and contracts. She lay still, listening, waiting for it to change or stop. When it finally did, she felt foolish for giving it so much. She fell asleep shortly after, telling herself it was nothing. The second night, the sound returned. This time, Laura was certain she was fully awake. The tapping followed the same pattern, but it felt closer, as if it were coming from somewhere inside the house rather than outside the walls. She turned toward Mark, listening to his breathing, grounding herself in something real and familiar. The sound stopped again. Laura got out of bed quietly and stepped into the hallway. The house felt different when she stood in it alone at night. Larger somehow, heavier. She moved slowly, listening for any sign of movement, but everything was still. No doors open, no lights on. Nothing out of place. She returned to bed, unsettled, but still convinced there was a reasonable explanation she just hadn't found yet. Over the next few nights, nothing happened. Laura relaxed again. She even felt embarrassed for letting something so small get under her skin. Life continued, busy and loud during the day, quiet and forgettable at night. Then the sound changed. One night, instead of tapping, Laura heard something that made her sit up instantly. It was a slow, dragging noise, soft but deliberate, as if something were being moved carefully across the floor. It wasn't random. It had direction. It had intention. Laura didn't get out of bed this time. She stayed perfectly still, her heart racing as she listened. The sound lasted less than a minute before fading into silence. When it stopped, the quiet felt heavier than before. The next morning, she searched the house while everyone else was distracted. She checked floors, corners, furniture, even the garage. She found nothing. No marks, no signs of disturbance, no explanation. That was when doubt crept in. Laura began questioning herself. Maybe she was overtired. Maybe stress was doing this. She stopped mentioning the noises to Mark because she didn't want to sound unstable. She didn't want to become someone who imagined threats where none existed. But her body reacted even when her mind tried to stay rational. She slept lightly. Every small sound pulled her awake. She began memorizing the normal noises of the house. said she could tell the difference between what belonged and what didn't. One night, close to 3 in the morning, Laura heard something that made her sit up immediately. The sound wasn't tapping or dragging. It was subtler than that. A faint shifting noise, like someone adjusting their stance, just outside the children's rooms. She whispered Mark's name. The sound stopped instantly. Laura shook him awake, her voice shaking as she tried to explain what she was hearing. Mark listened, tired but attentive, then checked the hallway himself. He found nothing. When he came back, he reassured her gently, but Laura could sense his uncertainty. Not disbelief, concern. Days passed, then weeks. The sounds came and went unpredictably. Laura stopped trusting silence. When the house was quiet, she listened harder, waiting for something to break it. She considered seeing a professional, but couldn't explain what was happening without sounding vague or irrational. Then came the night everything changed. It was raining lightly, the kind of rain that makes the house feel sealed off from the world. Mark was awake beside her, scrolling on his phone, when Laura heard the tapping again. Clear, close, unmistakable. She didn't move. Mark lowered his phone slowly. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Laura told me that moment shattered something inside her. Relief and fear hit at the same time. She wasn't imagining it. She never had been. But now, there was no hiding from it either. The tapping came again, followed by a faint, shifting sound. Mark got out of bed and opened the bedroom door. The hallway was empty. It came again, muffled, as if from inside the walls. The next day, they called professionals, contractors, pest control, inspectors. No one found anything that explained the sounds. No animals, no structural damage serious enough to justify what they'd heard. Life moved forward because it had to. Months later, during a bathroom renovation, workers opened a section of wall near the hallway. Inside, they found disturbed insulation and compressed dust, signs of movement that didn't have a clear explanation. The space was narrow, uncomfortable, and shouldn't have allowed anything to move through it easily. No answers came with the discovery. No certainty. Just confirmation that something had been there at some point. The sounds never returned after that. Laura told me the most disturbing part wasn't what might have caused them. It was how close she came to convincing herself that it was all in her head. How easily doubt isolated her. How long fear can exist quietly before someone else finally hears it. Even now, she sleeps lightly. Silence makes her uneasy. And when the house is too quiet, she listens, not because she expects the sound to return, but because she knows how real it felt when no one believed her. And that's what stays with her. Sometimes the most frightening thing isn't the noise itself, but how long it can live inside your home before you are no longer alone. If this story stayed with you, please like the video, subscribe to Silent Nightmares, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps real experiences like this continue to be heard. Rachel said it started during a period of her life when everything felt overwhelming but manageable. She was in her late 30s, married, working part-time from home, and raising 2 young children. Her days were loud and demanding, her nights quiet but short. Like many mothers, the only time she truly had to herself was after everyone else fell asleep. Once the kids were in bed and her husband had drifted off beside her, the house would finally go still. Rachel told me she often stayed up late, sitting alone in the living room with a dim lamp on, scrolling through her phone or folding laundry in silence. Those moments used to feel peaceful. But slowly, without any clear reason, they began to feel heavy. She described it as a presence knot, something visible. Not something she could point to, but a strong sense that the house wasn't empty anymore once the lights went off upstairs. The silence felt different, thicker, as if it were listening. At first, she blamed the house itself. It was an older home, with wooden floors that creaked when the temperature changed. Pipes knocked inside the walls. The heating system clicked on and off through the night. Rachel told herself this was normal. She'd lived there for years without incident. But then she started noticing patterns. Every night, around the same time, she would hear movement upstairs after the kids were asleep. Soft footsteps. The faint sound of someone shifting their weight in the hallway. When she checked the baby monitor, both children were sound asleep. When she asked her husband in the morning, he said he hadn't gotten up. Rachel began leaving lights on downstairs when she went to bed. She started double-checking the locks. Not because she believed someone had broken in, but because the unease wouldn't let her rest. The isolation made it worse. Her husband worked long hours and was usually exhausted. When she tried to explain how the house felt at night, he listened politely but brushed it off as stress. "You're running yourself into the ground," he told her. "Your brain isn't shutting off." She wanted to believe him, but her body didn't. Rachel said she started waking up around 3 in the morning with her heart pounding, convinced she had heard someone downstairs. Sometimes it was the sound of a cabinet closing. Other times, a dull thud, like something being set down carefully. Each time, the house was empty when she checked. The worst part wasn't fear. It was doubt. She began questioning her memory. She couldn't always remember whether she'd de-locked the back door or turned off the kitchen light. Once, she found a chair pulled slightly away from the dining table, angled toward the hallway. She had no memory of moving it. Then came the night she couldn't explain away. It was winter, and the house was sealed tight against the cold. Her husband and kids were asleep upstairs. Rachel was alone in the living room, folding clothes in near darkness. She heard footsteps cross the kitchen floor behind her, slow, deliberate, close enough that she felt the vibration through the floorboards. She didn't turn around right away. She assumed it was her husband. She even said his name softly. There was no response. When she turned, the kitchen was empty. But the cabinet beneath the sink was open, wide enough to be noticeable. Rachel told me she stood there for a long time, staring at it, trying to convince herself she had opened it earlier and forgotten. The next day, she bought a small indoor security camera. She didn't tell her family. She placed it on a shelf in the corner of the living room, angled toward the hallway and kitchen. She told herself it was just to calm her nerves. That once she saw nothing was happening, she could finally relax. That night, she barely slept. The following morning, after the house emptied out, Rachel sat alone at the kitchen table and reviewed the footage. For hours, there was nothing. The living room sat still. Shadows shifted as the heater turned on. Headlights passed outside. Then, at exactly 2:14 a.m., the motion alert activated. Rachel watched as a woman stepped into frame from the hallway. The woman was barefoot. She wore one of Rachel's old sweatshirts. Her hair was loose, her movements slow and unsteady, like she was half awake. She walked into the kitchen, opened the cabinet under the sink, and stood there without moving for nearly a full minute. Then she closed it and walked back down the hallway. Rachel recognized herself immediately. She said the realization didn't come with panic. It came with a hollow, sinking feeling. She had no memory of waking up. No memory of standing in her kitchen in the middle of the night. But the footage didn't lie. She kept watching. There were more clips. Some nights, she stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring upward. Other nights, she sat on the couch, facing the dark television screen, completely still. Once, she walked into the hallway and pressed her palm flat against the wall, as if steadying herself. Every movement was quiet, careful, intentional. When Rachel finally told her husband, he went silent. He admitted that he had noticed things 2 doors left open, lights turned on, but assumed it was stress or one of the kids. He hadn't wanted to worry her. A doctor later explained it clearly. Severe sleep deprivation, anxiety, and stress had triggered episodes of sleepwalking. Her brain wasn't fully shutting down. She was moving through her home without awareness, acting out something she couldn't remember. It was a logical explanation, a comforting one, but Rachel told me there was one detail she couldn't let go of. In every clip, no matter where she was standing, her head was tilted slightly, as if she were listening. As if, even in that state, she believed she wasn't alone. The house never felt empty at night because it wasn't. After her family fell asleep, she was still there, moving through the darkness, leaving traces she couldn't remember, becoming the very presence that had frightened her. And the most disturbing realization wasn't that something had been watching her. It was that she had been watching herself from the outside without ever knowing. My name is Daniel Moore, and I share real experiences sent to me by people who lived through moments that quietly reshaped how they understand fear. The story you're about to hear was shared with me by a woman named Laura Bennett, a married woman and mother living in Columbus, Ohio, USA. What happened to her didn't involve anything dramatic on the surface. No break-ins, no visible damage, no clear answers. And that's exactly why it stayed with her. This is Laura's experience, as she told it to me. Laura said she never believed a house could feel different depending on the time of night. To her, a home was a fixed thing: walls, doors, routines. Predictable, safe. She and her husband had lived in the same two-story suburban house for almost a decade. Their son was 8 years old. Their life followed a familiar rhythm. That rhythm changed when her husband started traveling for work. He was gone several nights a week, sometimes returning after midnight, sometimes not until morning. Laura didn't mind at first. She was used to managing the house on her own. But she told me that once the nights became quieter, she noticed things she had never paid attention to before. Especially after midnight. Laura was never a good sleeper. When the house settled into silence, she often stayed awake, scrolling through her phone or listening to the distant hum of traffic. During the day, the house felt normal. Lived in, warm, but after midnight, when she was awake, alone, it felt strangely unfamiliar, like a place she recognized but didn't fully know. She assumed it was exhaustion. The first time she noticed something truly off, she was lying in bed around 1:15 a.m. The house was dark. Her son was asleep. She heard a sound from downstairs. Not loud, not sudden. A soft shift, like weight being placed carefully on the floor. She froze and listened. The sound didn't repeat. After a minute, everything went quiet again. Laura told herself it was the house settling. Older homes made noise at night. She'd heard that explanation her whole life. Still, she didn't fall asleep easily after that. Over the next few weeks, the feeling returned again and again, but only when she was awake after midnight. It wasn't fear exactly. It was awareness. The sense that the house wasn't behaving the way it did during the day. A hallway door she was certain she'd closed would be open in the morning. A chair at the kitchen table would be angled slightly differently. Nothing dramatic. Nothing she could point to with confidence. Each time, she blamed herself. She told me she became embarrassed by her own thoughts. She didn't want to be the kind of person who imagined threats in empty rooms, so she kept quiet and kept adjusting. Then she started noticing the timing. Nothing ever happened before midnight. Nothing ever happened when her husband was home. And nothing ever happened when she was asleep. Only when she was awake. Alone, listening. One night, she heard footsteps. Not fast, not heavy. Slow and deliberate, moving across the living room below her bedroom. She sat up in bed, heart racing, listening closely. The footsteps paused, then continued, softer this time, as if whoever was moving was being careful. Laura didn't call out. She didn't grab her phone. She stayed still, telling herself that panic would only make things worse. The sound stopped near the staircase. She waited a long time before she moved again. The next morning, the front door was locked. The windows were secure. Nothing was missing. Her husband brushed it off as stress. Laura nodded and tried to believe him. But something inside her had already shifted. She told me the house no longer felt empty at night. It felt occupied, not visibly, not loudly, but in a quiet, patient way. She began leaving lights on downstairs. It helped a little, but the feeling never fully left. Then came the night that made her realize the house wasn't changing randomly. She was awake on the couch around 2 a.m., the TV muted. She heard a sound in the kitchen metal lightly touching ceramic. She recognized it instantly. The sound of the knife drawer being opened, just enough for the contents to shift. She held her breath. The drawer didn't close right away. There was a pause, then a soft slide as it shut again. Laura didn't move for several minutes. In the morning, she checked the drawer. Everything was there, nothing missing. But one knife was turned sideways, out of alignment with the rest. She knew she hadn't touched it. That was the night she started locking her bedroom door. She told me it felt ridiculous at first, like admitting defeat to her own imagination. But once the door was locked, the sounds stayed farther away. Always downstairs, almost as if something understood the boundary. She installed security cameras soon, after nothing expensive, just enough to give her peace of mind. What they showed disturbed her more than anything else. On nights when she heard sounds, the footage didn't show movement. Instead, there were gaps. Hours of missing time with no error notifications, no power outages, no alerts, just blank stretches where nothing had been recorded at all. The company blamed a software glitch. Laura stopped sleeping properly after that. The final night came quietly. She woke up just after midnight, already alert. The house felt tense, like it was waiting. She lay still, listening. No footsteps, no movement. Then she heard breathing. It wasn't coming from the room. It was somewhere beyond the door. Slow, controlled, familiar enough to sound human, unfamiliar enough to make her skin crawl. She stayed completely still. After what felt like forever, the breathing moved away. In the morning, she found the hallway mirror smudged at shoulder height, as if someone had stood close to it for a long time. Laura and her family moved out less than a month later. She told me the realization that still haunts her ISNT, that someone might have been inside her home. It's that the house never truly changed at all. She did. She was the only one awake to notice what the house became after midnight. And whatever shared that space with her never needed to rush. My husband said it was just stress until the silence answered back. My name is Daniel, and I narrate real-life psychological accounts shared with me by people who struggled to explain what they experienced. This story was told to me by Emily Carter, a married mother of 2 living in Ohio, us. What you're about to hear did not happen to my mid, happened to her. Emily asked me to tell it clearly and honestly, because when she tried to explain it herself, no one seemed to understand how deeply it affected her. Emily described her life at the time as stable and ordinary. She was 38, married for over a decade, raising 2 children, and managing the quiet exhaustion that comes with balancing family and responsibility. Their home was calm, predictable, and safe. Nights followed the same routine, and once everyone was asleep, the silence of the house usually felt peaceful. That changed slowly. Emily said the first thing she noticed wasn't a noise, but the absence of familiar ones. One night, while cleaning the kitchen after everyone had gone to bed, she realized the house felt unnaturally still. The refrigerator seemed quieter. The clock barely registered. Her own breathing sounded too loud in comparison. It felt less like silence and more like the house was pausing. When she mentioned it to her husband Ryan, he brushed it off gently. He told her stress could heighten awareness, that exhaustion plays tricks on the mind. Emily wanted to agree. She told herself it was nothing, that she was overthinking. But the feeling returned the next night and the one after that. As weeks passed, the silence began to feel focused. At night, lying in bed, Emily became intensely aware of the hallway outside their bedroom, the dark space just beyond the door. It felt as though the house wasn't empty, was attentive. She tried grounding herself with logic, reminding herself that homes settle. That quiet can feel strange when you're overtired. One night, something shifted. Emily woke suddenly and, in the stillness, felt her name form clearly in her mind. It wasn't a voice she heard with her ears, but it was unmistakable. She sat upright, heart racing, listening for anything else. Nothing followed. The silence remained, unchanged, as if it had completed its purpose. She didn't tell Ryan about that part. Saying it out loud felt like crossing a line she couldn't step back from. Instead, she complained of poor sleep and anxiety. Ryan suggested rest, time off, maybe talking to someone professionally. He was kind but distant, in a practical way that made Emily feel foolish for being unsettled. Not long after, Emily experienced the moment that made her doubt herself the most. Late one night, she checked on her children after waking from an uneasy sleep. Both were sound asleep. As she turned back down the hallway, the silence felt heavier than before. Acting on impulse, she whispered, "Hello?" The silence responded not with sound, but with pressure. It felt closer, tighter, as if something had acknowledged her presence. She stood frozen, then forced herself back to bed, telling herself she had imagined the entire exchange. From that point on, Emily began noticing a pattern. When she spoke into empty rooms, the silence seemed to react. Not emotionally, not dramatically, but with a sense of awareness. It didn't frighten her in a traditional way. What unsettled her was how familiar it felt, like something that had been there all along, waiting to be noticed. She stopped sharing these thoughts with her husband. His concern had shifted toward solutions, stress management, medication. Emily didn't want to be fixed. She wanted someone to tell her that what she felt made sense. Instead, she carried it alone. The most intense moment came when Ryan was away on a business trip. The house was quiet earlier than usual that night. Emily sat alone in the living room, lights low, television off. The silence settled around her completely. Without planning to, she spoke aloud. "I know you're there." What followed wasn't a sound, but a certainty that didn't feel like her own. The understanding came fully formed in her mind. We always have been. Emily didn't panic. She didn't scream or run. She sat there, shaking, realizing something deeply uncomfortable. Not that the house was alive, or that something supernatural was happening, but that her mind had filled the silence. Because no one else ever truly listened when she said something was wrong. When Ryan returned and she finally told him everything, he didn't argue. He looked tired, thoughtful. That night, the house was normal again. Quiet in the way it used to be. Emily told me the realization that still troubles her is this. The silence never answered because something was there. It answered because she had been unheard for so long that her own thoughts learned to respond. And even now, years later, in a house full of noise, she still feels that silence, waiting for the moment everything goes quiet again. My name is Daniel Moore, and the story you're about to hear was shared with me by Hannah Collins, a mother living in Sheffield, England. What I'm about to recount happened to her inside her own home over several quiet weeks. While her family slept peacefully each night, Hannah remained awake, gripped by a fear she couldn't explain and couldn't ignore. Hannah didn't describe her experience as dramatic. There were no sudden incidents, no obvious danger. What unsettled her most was how normal everything looked on the surface, while something inside her slowly unraveled. This is her account, told as she lived it. Hannah said the fear arrived gradually. At first, it felt like simple restlessness. She would lie in bed beside her husband, listening to his steady breathing, waiting for sleep that never came. The house was quiet, familiar, safe, and yet her body refused to relax. She had no specific worries keeping her awake. No thoughts racing through her mind. Just a tight, constant alertness, as if her body believed something was wrong before her mind could find a reason. Night after night, she stayed awake while everyone else slept. Her children slept deeply in their rooms. Hannah checked on them often, standing silently in their doorways, watching their chests rise and fall. Seeing them safe brought comfort, but it also made her feel more alone. The house felt different at night, not threatening, not haunted, just heavy with silence. Every small sound felt closer than it should. The hum of electricity, the faint creak of cooling wood. The quiet pressed in on her. Sometimes she thought she heard movement, not footsteps, just the suggestion of motion. When she focused, the sound vanished. Still, her heart would race, and sleep felt impossible afterward. She blamed stress, fatigue, motherhood. She told herself this was normal. Weeks passed. Her husband slept through the nights without issue. The children woke refreshed and energetic. Hannah moved through her days, exhausted, detached, and slow. By night, she stopped trying to sleep altogether. She stayed awake on purpose. She lay still, listening, watching the bedroom door, waiting for something she couldn't name. She wasn't afraid of an intruder. She wasn't imagining a presence. She just felt responsible, like it was her job to stay awake. One night, she realized she had been holding her breath. Her chest ached, her heart pounding. She forced herself to breathe quietly, afraid even the sound of her breath might disturb the house. The thought made her feel foolish. She had never been an anxious person. She trusted logic. But logic did nothing to quiet the feeling that the hallway outside her bedroom shouldn't be entered at night. Her daughter said something a few days later that unsettled her deeply. Half asleep, she asked Hannah why she was always walking around when it's dark. Hannah laughed it off, telling herself children dream strange things. But the comment stayed with her. Hannah knew she hadn't been leaving the bed at night. She was sure of it. Still, strange details began to surface. She felt more exhausted in the mornings than made sense. Once, she found the hallway light on. Another time, the living room television was off when she was certain it had been on the night before. Her husband dismissed it gently. Old house, busy life. Tired minds forget things. Hannah wanted to believe that. At night, her fear deepened. She stopped lying flat and began sitting upright, watching the darkness until her eyes burned. Sometimes she blinked and felt as though time had skipped minutes or hours, gone without memory. One night, she found herself standing at the top of the stairs, barefoot on cold wood, staring into the dark living room. The television glowed silently below. She didn't remember turning it on. She didn't remember leaving the bed. She returned upstairs, shaking. A week later, she collapsed in the kitchen. At the hospital, the doctor asked about headaches, confusion, memory gaps, and sleep. Then he asked about their heating system. A professional inspection followed. The house had a slow carbon monoxide leak, not enough to trigger alarms, enough to disrupt sleep, distort perception, and fragment memory over time. As Hannah listened, everything made sense. She hadn't been imagining danger. Her body had stayed awake because something was wrong. While her family slept peacefully, she remained alert, absorbing the exposure, protecting them without realizing it. The most disturbing realization came later. Her children hadn't been imagining her presence at night. She had been walking the house. Even now, with the problem fixed and the house safe, Hannah struggles to sleep. Some nights, she lies awake listening to the silence, wondering how long she stayed awake before and how close she came to never waking at all. If this story stayed with you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes, the most frightening experiences are the ones that happen quietly while everyone else is asleep. My name is Daniel Moore, and what you're about to hear is not my story. It was shared with me by Laura Bennett, a mother of two living in Madison, Wisconsin. And the events I'm about to recount happened to her inside her own home over the course of several quiet, ordinary weeks. She didn't come to me looking for drama or attention. She came because what she experienced still unsettles her in ways she can't fully explain, even now. What follows is Laura's account told in her words. as she lived it through long nights, familiar rooms, and a growing sense that something wasn't right inside the place where she felt safest. Laura told me that the noises started in late winter, during one of those stretches when the nights feel endless and the house seems to shrink after dark. At first, she barely noticed them. She was a working mother, married, raising 2 children under 10. Her days were loud, busy, and exhausting. By the time the house finally went quiet at night, her body felt heavy in a way that made everything else fade into the background. The sounds were small: a dull thump from upstairs after midnight, a faint scraping that stopped when she paused to listen. Once or twice, what sounded like footsteps, but slow, uneven, and brief. She told herself it was the house settling. Old homes made noise. Everyone knew that. Pipes knocked. Floorboards expanded and contracted. Wisconsin winters were brutal on wood and metal. So she ignored it. Weeks passed, and the sounds continued. Not every night, not on any predictable schedule, just often enough to register, never enough to demand attention. Laura admitted something important to me. She didn't want to investigate. The noises happened late when her husband was asleep beside her and her children were safe in their rooms. Getting up would mean acknowledging the unease curling in her chest. It was easier to roll over, blame, anxiety, and promise herself she'd check in the morning. Morning always made everything seem foolish. Daylight stripped the house of its tension. Every room looked normal. Every lock was secure. Life resumed its routine pace, and the memory of fear felt exaggerated, almost embarrassing. Until the night her son spoke up. She was tucking him in, smoothing his blankets, when he asked her casually, the way children ask things without understanding their weight. "Mom, why do you walk around the house when you can't sleep?" Laura laughed at first. She told him she didn't, that he must have been dreaming. But he frowned, confused in a way that made her stomach tighten. "You do," he insisted. "I hear you. You stop outside my door." That night, Laura didn't sleep. She told herself he was imagining things. Kids heard sounds and turned them into stories. She reminded herself how often she had done the same at his age. Still, she started paying closer attention. The next few nights, she lay awake longer than usual. She noticed how the house sounded when everyone was asleep: the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the hallway clock, the distant rush of wind against the siding. And beneath it all, movement, soft, deliberate movement. Once, she heard what sounded like a drawer sliding shut downstairs. Her husband slept through it. Laura got up and checked the kitchen. Everything was exactly where it should be. Another night, she heard a low thud from the hallway outside the bedrooms. When she opened the door, the hallway was empty. The carpet was undisturbed. The air felt strangely warm. Her daughter spoke up a few days later. She told Laura that sometimes, at night, it sounded like someone was standing outside her room, breathing funny. She said it the way children say unsettling things without fear, just curiosity. That was when Laura stopped ignoring the noises. She checked the locks every night. She walked the house before bed. She even blamed her self-stress, overwork, imagination. She wondered if she was projecting her anxiety onto her children, making them notice things they otherwise wouldn't. But the sounds continued. And something else started happening. Laura began waking up in places she didn't remember going to. Once, she found herself standing in the hallway in the middle of the night, one hand on the wall, her heart racing. She had no memory of getting out of bed. Another time, she woke up on the couch downstairs, the television glowing silently in front of her. Her husband suggested sleepwalking. Laura wanted to believe him. It was a neat explanation, something that fit into a box labeled temporary. But sleepwalking didn't explain the headaches, or the constant nausea, or the way her thoughts felt slow, like she was moving through water. She started forgetting things, small things at first, leaving the stove on, misplacing her phone in the refrigerator, losing track of time. One afternoon, while the kids were at school, She sat at the kitchen table and realized she couldn't remember driving home. That was the moment she got scared. A professional came to inspect the house. Laura didn't tell him everything, just that they'd been hearing noises and feeling unwell. He checked the furnace, the vents, the basement. When he tested the air, his expression changed. The house had elevated levels of carbon monoxide. Not enough to trigger the old detector mounted in the hallway. Enough to cause confusion, headaches, disorientation. Enough to blur memory. Enough to make people move through their homes without fully waking. The furnace had been malfunctioning for weeks. Laura listened as he explained it, her mind replaying every sound, every step, every half-remembered night. She realized the truth slowly, painfully. The noises she had ignored weren't intruders. They weren't the house. They were her. Her children hadn't been imagining someone standing outside their doors. They had been hearing their mother disoriented, pacing, stopping without knowing why. She had been the presence in the hallway. The realization didn't bring comfort. It brought a deeper unease. Because Laura understood something then that still troubles her. If her children hadn't spoken up, if she had continued ignoring the noises, she might never have realized how dangerous the silence had become. Even now, long after the furnace was replaced and the air cleared, Laura says she sometimes wakes at night listening. Not for footsteps, but for proof that she's fully awake. If you found this story unsettling, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps these true accounts be heard and reminds others to pay attention to the quiet things we're taught to ignore. My name is Daniel, and for the past several years, I've been collecting and narrating real experiences shared with me by people who needed their stories told carefully and honestly. The account I'm about to share was told to me by a woman named Rachel Collins, a married mother of 2, living in Portland, Oregon, USA. What you're about to hear happened to her inside her own home, over the course of several quiet nights. She didn't come to me looking for attention or drama. She came because, even now, she still struggles to explain what she realized in the end. This is Rachel's story, as she told it to me. Rachel said the sound started during one of the most unremarkable periods of her life. Nothing was wrong on the surface. Her husband worked regular hours, her kids were healthy, and the house was the same modest 2-story place they'd lived in for years. If anything, she described that time as boring in the best way. Predictable, safe. That's why, when she first heard the noises at night, she didn't panic. She told me she'd always struggled with mild anxiety. Not the kind that stopped her from functioning, but enough that she sometimes overthought things in the dark. Her doctor had once told her that heightened stress could make ordinary sounds feel threatening. So when she woke up around 1:30 a.m., to a faint noise downstairs, her first thought wasn't danger. 'Twas herself. The sound was subtle. Not a crash or a bang. More like movement. Something shifting, followed by a pause. She lay still in bed, listening, her husband's steady breathing beside her. After a minute, the house went quiet again. She told herself it was the settling of the structure. This time, she was awake when she heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound, like careful footsteps, but too light to be certain. She stared at the ceiling, heart rate climbing, mentally cataloging everything it could be. The kids sleepwalk sometimes. The cat could have knocked something over. Her imagination was known to spiral when she was overtired. She didn't wake her husband. She didn't check the house. She stayed still until the sound stopped. Over the following week, the noises became familiar enough that they stopped feeling urgent. That almost made them worse. Rachel said the sounds always came late at night, never during the day. They weren't loud, didn't follow a predictable pattern. Sometimes it was a faint creak on the stairs. Sometimes the soft click of a door that hadn't been fully closed. Once, she was sure she heard the rustle of fabric from the living room below. Each time, she blamed anxiety. She even joked about it with her husband one morning, saying she thought her brain was inventing ghosts because she hadn't slept properly in months. He laughed and agreed, gently reminding her how sensitive she'd been lately. That reassurance helped for a while. What unsettled her wasn't the noise itself, but how normal it felt after a few nights. She said there was no spike of fear anymore, just a quiet awareness, almost like her mind was learning to accept it. One night, she finally got out of bed. It was around 2 a.m. The sound had been louder this time, slow, deliberate step on the staircase. Her husband didn't stir when she slipped out from under the covers. She grabbed her phone, using the dim screen as a light, and walked to the bedroom door. The hallway was empty. She stood there for a long moment, listening. The house smelled the same, looked the same. Nothing was out of place. When she reached the top of the stairs, she felt foolish for even checking. She went back to bed, telling herself she'd let her nerves get the better of her. The next morning, she found the living room window unlocked. It wasn't broken. There were no marks, just unlocked. She was certain she'd locked it the night before. She always did. But again, she doubted herself. Maybe she'd forgotten. Maybe her husband had opened it earlier and not mentioned it. Still, that night, she locked every door and window twice. The sounds continued. Rachel told me the worst part wasn't fear, it was uncertainty. Every explanation felt plausible enough to silence her instincts. And over time, she noticed something else. The sounds were considerate. They never happened when the kids were awake. Never during the early evening. Never when her husband worked late and she was alone downstairs. They only happened after midnight. Only when everyone was asleep. That realization unsettled her more than the noises ever had. One night, she stayed awake on purpose. She lay in bed, phone charging beside her, pretending to sleep. The house was silent for a long time. Then, just after 2 a.m., she heard it again. A soft footstep, then another. Slow, controlled. She held her breath. The sound moved across the living room, paused, then shifted toward the kitchen. She didn't move. She didn't call out. She told me that. In that moment, her anxiety didn't feel like anxiety anymore. It felt like recognition. She heard a drawer open, not slammed, not forced, opened carefully, as if whoever did it knew exactly how much pressure to apply. That was when she woke her husband. He searched the house with the lights on. Everything looked normal. No broken locks, no missing items. The drawer in the kitchen was closed again. He reassured her, though his voice wasn't as confident as before. The next day, Rachel checked something she hadn't thought to before. The security camera logs. They had a basic system, nothing fancy. Cameras on the front and back doors, motion activated. She scrolled through the nighttime recordings, expecting to find nothing. Instead, she found gaps. Not footage of someone entering, just missing time. Hours where the system showed no data at all. No errors, no alerts. Just blank stretches between recordings. The technician later told her it could be a software issue. That explanation should have comforted her. It didn't. The final night came quietly. Rachel told me she woke up before the sound this time. She didn't know why. She just opened her eyes in the dark, heart already racing. The house felt occupied in a way she couldn't explain. Then she heard breathing, not her husband's. It was faint, controlled, coming from the hallway just outside the bedroom door. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She lay frozen, listening as the breathing paused, then slowly retreated down the hall. The next morning, nothing was stolen, nothing was broken. But in the guest room, the closet door was open. Inside, on the shelf, was a folded blanket she hadn't used in years. She hadn't taken it out. Rachel and her family moved out 2 weeks later. She told me she spent months replaying everything in her head, trying to convince herself it was stress, imagination, coincidence. But the realization she couldn't escape was this. Whatever had been moving through her house at night wasn't chaotic. It wasn't reckless. It knew their schedule. It knew when to be quiet. And the most disturbing part wasn't that someone might have been inside her home. It was that, for a while, she had trained herself not to notice. If you found this story unsettling, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps keep these real stories told with care and respect.